Everyone. This is a first part into kind of a overview of the boat I've been working on recently. So a couple of years ago, I purchased this 1978 Robalo R190 19-foot center console that was pretty rough. I picked it up for $250, and here is the kind of part one to all the stuff that I've been doing to this boat. Kind of the end goal of this was to do a total refit on this boat, go through it, kind of customize it, make it look a little bit more modern. This was the first real major project boat that I ever really wanted to undertake in. And so here's kind of a part one into all the stuff that I've done up to this point. A disclaimer, I haven't finished it yet, but I figured it'd be kind of cool to share some of the stuff that I've already done to this boat because it's been quite a lot of stuff. And so I'll take you through it starting from the beginning. So like I said, this was a $250 boat that I found on Facebook Marketplace of all places. It had been sitting in this guy's backyard for who knows how long, and it popped up because I was looking for something cheap, something that I could get into that I didn't have to spend a whole ton of money on. It would have been nice to, be able to do this on like something like a Seacraft or a Seahawk or a privateer or something that's a little bit more of a real Chesapeake boat. I live in Maryland, so those are all the boats that are pretty popular, and with those popular boats comes a big price tag, even with the ones that are real shot. So when I saw this one popped up, I figured, you know what, go take a look at it. And after looking at it and talking with the previous owner, we settled on $250, and it was mine, and I drug it home. So as you can see from this picture right here, this boat was it was pretty bad. I went and looked at it on one of the coldest days in the winter of a couple years ago, and so the underfloor, I can't remember if it was where the gas tank, I believe it was where the gas tank sat in this thing originally, was filled with water, and it was so cold from sitting outside that it completely froze solid. The transom, from what I could see, it looked rotted, and come to find out it was. It was pretty dinged up, scratches, spider cracks on the gel coat, pretty much everything. And I kind of knew that rolling into this thing. I kind of wanted to do something really from the ground up, new transom, new stringers, floors, yada yada. So that was like really the first look at it. Those first three pictures were the main ones that he had posted of it, and that's really all I knew about it before looking at it. And really from looking at it, you couldn't tell much more than that, other than this thing needed a ton of work. So the first thing I started doing with it was obviously cleaning all the leaves and the dirt and all the crap that was in the floor out of it. And then I started with kind of getting ready to cut up the floor on this thing because I didn't really like the layout of it, and it was one of the first things that had to go. So I started cutting up the floor, and in doing so, found a ton of fiberglass that really had never even been saturated with resin at all. I mean, I was pulling up sheets of just dry fiberglass that was the floor. It was a 70s era AMC Robalo, so I wasn't too surprised, but it was pretty interesting pulling up just dry sheets of fiberglass that had just been sitting there for almost 40 years, never saturated with resin. Then next was removing all the old foam, and if you guessed it was waterlogged, you'd be correct. It was pretty bad. The pretty much all the foam underneath the floor, except for a couple spots, was just completely soaked with water. I mean, it'd been sitting like that for years. So I just started ripping it all out. So after I got the majority of the foam out, I turned back towards the transom area, and I knew it was probably rotted. I didn't think it was going to be this bad, but I knew I was going to have to replace the transom. So I started digging into it, and just found pretty much the whole thing was all rotted out. I mean, the wood was falling off of the thing without, even me trying, just taking a pry bar and jamming it behind it, and you'd pull a whole chunk off. I mean, it just came off pretty easy in most spots. So after I got all the old rotted wood removed, started moving on to replacing the coring material. I used two pieces of layered 3/4 inch marine Douglas fir, so the whole transom thickness was an inch and a half for the coring material. And this boat had a pretty good curve in the transom, so I actually ended up scoring it staggered on both sides and getting it to take the bend in the back, which made it a lot easier than trying to bend a solid 3/4 piece of plywood at a time. I did it in 2 steps, using epoxy to bond it to the existing fiberglass on the outside. And this kind of brought up one of the first things that I wanted to change about this boat was the transom height. So originally I wanted to do like a fully enclosed transom with like a engine bracket on the back. But after talking with I know I called Armstrong, and there was a couple other guys that I called that made these brackets, and they really didn't recommend putting them on boats underneath like 20 feet, mainly because they said it would pretty much always porpoise, kind of cause handling issues with moving the motor that far back on a smaller boat. So instead of doing that, I settled with raising the transom from a 20-inch height to a 25-inch height for the motor. Just trying to increase the height of the back of the boat to kind of reduce any splashover from waves, raise the power head up, and kind of all around just make it a little bit more friendly for, going through a little bit rougher water. So here's the transom all glassed up after I laid the core material down. I ended up using a 1708, and I think by the time I was done with it, it was like 5 or 6, maybe even 7 layers. So probably really overbuilt, but I didn't mind adding some extra layers just to make it a little bit stronger. And I ended up also gel coating over it. I was using polyester resin, layup resin, so I was using the gel coat as like the final seal coat to enclose it, encapsulate it, and let the fiberglass finally cure, or the resin, excuse me, finally cure. So with the transom done, at least for now, I moved over to redoing the stringer system on the boat. And so here's me laying up the new stringers. Pretty much used Douglas fir for this whole boat. I didn't really have the money for Kusa or a composite. So here's me laying them up, and then fiberglassing over them, and eventually gel coating them. And I tied them into the transom as well to kind of increase the strength of it. So next I moved on to the fuel tank bulkheads, and I switched over. I went with one of the molar plastic fuel tanks versus the original tank was in it that was aluminum, and the kind of just worked out that the plastic one fit where, in between the stringers, and there's plenty of fuel capacity. I think it's like a 45-gallon tank, and, no rot with the aluminum, so that's what I went with. So after the fuel tank bulkheads and also that little under kind of floor storage compartment that down the side of the stringers was done, moved on to running rigging tubes, because after that I was going to start redoing the pour foam that was in the boat. So I ran two different pipes, one that was going forward for things like the nav light, anchor light, and then one or a couple other things that could run through that, and then also the larger tube that you see that was running towards the back of the boat, that would have the fuel line, control cables, wiring harnesses for the motors, just stuff like that. And I wanted to make them big enough. I kind of hate boats that have real small rigging tubes or channels. It always makes it a pain to push or pull through new wires there. So I went with I believe it was 3-inch PVC pipe. And it runs all the way. It's going to be running all the way from underneath the console all the way to the back of the boat. So there's the fuel tank all strapped down. I had to make a couple of little aluminum bracket pieces just to strap the fuel tank down, but it's in there tight. It's definitely not going anywhere, so that's where it'll be staying for pretty much the rest of the time this boat's going to be on the water. So with that done, I started pouring the new foam for the boat. I used a 2 pound density pour foam. I ended up using about 10 gallons total, 5 gallons of the part A and then 5 gallon of the part B. They ship them in 5 gallon pails. And it went pretty smoothly. It's a little messy, but I filled up all the front cavities, let it overflow a little bit, and then I cut it flush and flat with the floor, as you see in that last picture. There's all the fuel tank plumbing, the fill, the vent, and then the fuel hose actually going into the tube to the back of the motor. And I thought it looked pretty good. It looked pretty clean when I was all said and done with it. So when I cut out the back of the boat in order to redo the transom, I had to cut out these little back pieces that were kind of part of the walls of the inside of the boat. And originally it was curved into the side, and so instead of doing that, I wanted to just have it transition straight back into the transom. And so I made these kind of little mini molds out of just basic stuff, just some excess plywood that I had laying around, and I used packing tape actually as like kind of a mold release, like a smooth surface. So built it up with a bunch of layers of 1708 and some gel coat, and just popped them out and trimmed them to size, and they'll fit right in to kind of cover that transition from the wall of the boat to the back of the transom. After that, I moved on to the new floor. So here I was using little thin pieces of plywood to make a template for the new floor piece. I always call it door skin, but just thin little plywood, hot glue into the shape. Take that and transfer it onto your new core material, and that's just how I got the shape of the floor down. Getting ready to roll and put the new floor in. So here's the templates for the floor, and I decided to do it all as one piece. So I got a bunch of pieces of melamine and laid them out on a flat little work surface table that I made up. And so I laid the templates on there, cut out all the fiberglass I needed, coated the melamine in actually a mold release as well, just so it wouldn't stick to it. Laid down the gel coat, did some chop strand mat, some 1708, bonded the core to it, and then, encased that in some more chop strand and 1708. So in the end, I had one big solid floor piece, instead of just doing it in a bunch of little pieces. Came out all together. So while I had the table set up for the floor, I started working on the cap, and pretty much like everything else on this boat, the core was pretty rotted. Here I was pulling up the under layer of the fiberglass that was encasing it, and the wood was all rotted. I mean, like you can see here, just picking it out really easily with just a screwdriver and a pry bar. So I ended up stripping all the wood off of it, down to bare fiberglass, put new plywood down, encasing it more fiberglass. So while I was redoing the top cap, kind of one of the other changes that I wanted to do to the boat was it had this kind of weird step-up shape in the front of the cap. I don't know what it was really ideally for when they made it. And so while I had it off, I cut out this step in it. In some of the earlier pictures you can see it, but it just bumped up in the middle. It was pretty weird looking. So I cut it out, cut it flat, laid the new core down, and then just filled in where I cut out with obviously more 1708 just to kind of build it up to a flat surface. Here's all the plywood going back into the cap, and then there's all the gel coat on the underside to just all seal it up and whatnot. So after letting the floor sit for a while, I had a couple buddies give me a hand because this thing was heavy. So I was test fitting it in there, and I was pretty happy with it. I mean, there's some gaps a little bit bigger than I was expecting or planning for at least, but nothing that I couldn't fill in and glass in once I got the floor ready to go in. So those were just the two little test fits of it. So here's the last picture I have of it. Last thing I've been doing was fairing the top cap. I got a bunch of other stuff that I gotta do. Pretty much have to fair the whole boat. But kind of this part one was a lot of like the structural things, like the floor, the transom, the stringers. So this was a part one. I'll keep posting some updates, you know, kind of following along about some of the other stuff I get going on this thing, because there's still a ton of stuff I got to do to this, but I figured it'd be kind of cool to share at least all the stuff I have done so far. And it's only a 15-16 minute video by now, but it's been quite a few months worth of work and a lot of going home itchy from all the fiberglass dust, but it's been pretty cool. I'm kind of excited to see where I can, you know, finish the boat off, make it look a little bit nicer, you know, with raising the transom, you know, doing some stuff to the cap. I got some other things in mind that I want to do. Probably going to make a different console for it, and you know, just kind of go from there. Make it look a little cooler, a little bit more functional, and that's about it for now. So look forward to another update coming to a part 2. I'm sure I'll post it here, and you know, it might be a couple months or so until I get some, you know, new pictures of it. I'll try to take some more videos too. And mainly all these, pretty much all these were just pictures, except for that one video of the top cap pulling apart the core material. But anyways, let me know what you think. If you have any suggestions, maybe of, you know, something I could do, make it look a little cooler, let me know. Until then, I'll see you next time.